Welcome to the September write-up. Let's dive in. The 3 Canoptek Scarabs from the Indomitus box were the first thing that I finished this month. I mentioned in the past that the colors of my Necron dynasty were meant to be black and purple, with brass armor being a standard for all troops and members of the elite caste, but I also remember really liking black on my Canoptek characters, so they get a little bit, as a treat. Consider it good branding for your robo-spiders. These little guys were fun. I love the sculpts, and they have a sort of Nilfgaardian feel between the black and gold. They give off a sense of weightlessness with how they're positioned, and I shouldn't have glued them to their mounts during construction. It made it a pain to actually detail and paint the rocks that their stands are hidden under. The corpse-like green I'm using for this new strain of Necrons looks good as their eyes. I'm looking forward to doing the other trio. The first major Necron character I'm painting in my new style is the Royal Warden. It was a bit of a trial to choose the distribution of color on this model and make sure that the purple segments were vivid enough to pop on the model. It still blends in a bit more than I'd like, but I'll find a way to the other side of that. Maybe I should invest in a brighter shade of violet. I really enjoyed the chance to play with the decorum on this model and add in a few simple free-handed patterns and stripes. The real challenge was making him fancy, but not so fancy as to overshadow his superiors. I'll be glad to paint up the Overlord so that I can get a full spectrum of extravagance on display. Everything else can fill in the gaps between Warrior and Overlord. After the Overlord was the Shoggoth. This blob of a mini was pretty simple. I tried to base its appearance off of what I remember from actually reading The Mountains of Madness all those years ago, with that grim and elaborate descriptive style that Lovecraft was so good at. Black and viscous with a gooey outer membrane that you could see its inner workings through. I made its eyes a sickly yellow in a similar bid for narrative consistency. The mouth was a bit of a challenge to figure out, but I decided to just make it a uniform mass of crimson and pink, with little suckers to yank your head off your neck, and grim tiny teeth, and the barely visible arm of a victim poking out from underneath. The final move was giving it a shiny glaze to make the outer layer look nice and wet. I think I made it sufficiently goopy looking, and just the thing to come barreling at you along a tunnel like an oncoming train. The first of the ever-elusive Neutral Heroes 2 box for Song of Ice and Fire was Walder Frey, this grumpy old man who would have been a very bland paint job if it weren't for the detailing on his chair and the alchemical backflips I went through to concoct that seafoam green color of his tunic that he's wearing. The precision work was trying to preserve the wrinkles on his ancient face and the raised wooden portions on his chair. Like Maester Pycelle before him, I elected not to paint in his eyes to give him that squinting, beady look. Untrustworthy. Looking forward to breaking out this wedding planner on the table. I understand he's a popular choice, very powerful if you're first or control the crown space. For the first unit in the Indomitus box on the Astartes side, I decided to do the Bladeguard veterans. These guys were complicated. A dozen little fiddly bits and bobs and decorations and livery all over their armor. While the Crimson Fist color scheme is set in stone for me, I grappled with the colors for the rest of their equipment. Sometimes I see white or steel shields on these guys, but I decided to make them the same drab blue as their armor, which felt oddly appropriate for the admittedly uniform fists, but I wanted to add enough embellishment to make them stand out, hence the crosses and the illuminated skulls that look like they're made of actual bone. How did they get them in there? I opted for a canvas color on their tabards, similar to the capes I'd given their captains. The power swords were a chance to reapproach that part of a mini. I looked around and found a decent recipe to slowly build up gradients on the blade, and that gradual shift from extreme shade to highlight. I do really like the opalescence of it. It looks like a shifting field of energy in a few places. Beyond that, the little personalizations that I gave their tilting shields was fun, trying to make each one look like a generic bit of heraldry. It might inspire me to go back and redo the shield on Pedro Cantor's headpiece. I haven't played with these guys on the tabletop. I hear they're powerful but slow and difficult to actually get into the action. Hopefully I can use them one day. Dario Naharis. This whole miniature was just an absolute blast. I more or less try to keep my Song of Ice and Fire minis close to the card art for ease of reference and unity of theme, but I knew I'd have to take some creative liberties when it came to the Captain of the Stormcrows. As soon as I saw that Daario was getting a mini, I knew I'd be picking out the golden hairs on his mustache to contrast that blue beard. Not wanting the facial hair to run into his clothes, I opted for a more deep royal purple on his tunic and then went nuts and gave him a pair of striped pantaloons that were a delight to trace out and color in. In the song, Daario is well known for being an utter fashion disaster, and I hoped to capture that energy with this model that I've affectionately started referring to as Clown Pirate. I'm not crazy about his cards on the table or his tactics. He seems very high risk, high reward, and is willing to burn through his own units to accomplish goals. A little too wasteful for my tastes. But we'll see. I am eager to try him out in the game. Throughout the whole month I've also been painting these Pyromancers and was really hoping to finish them up, but such is not the case. I'll reserve full judgment for when I complete the unit, but for now I can say that they are at least quick and easy to knock off. I can paint about 4 of them in 2 solid painting sessions if I put myself to it. They're simple minis, but they offer a bit of texture with the detail on their sleeves, and they gave me a chance to experiment with object source lighting in those glowing green vials of goop that they're toting around. That's a word I've been using a lot. Goop. After this, I'll finally be done the Lannisters, and I can start on a whole new box set. God, I have so many minis to paint. The last character model that I completed this month was the Judiciar, seemingly in full anticipation of the oncoming spooky season. His armor was relatively simple, just the right shade of black with the occasional picked-out bone highlights. Really, the only big artistic leaps I took were his coat and the little bits of personalization, like the red scarf around his mouth. I ended up going with a darkened brown leather texture for his overcoat, trying to make it look weathered and beaten with the highlights. After agonizing over exactly how to depict the hourglass that he's holding, I elected to try and paint in the blood-red sand filling it with a technique I picked up when painting a Tech Priest Dominus. I'm still unsure about that big blotch of white I put on the side, but it looks decent at the right angle. The other trial for this model, and indeed every mini in this monopose set, is whittling off the pre-established shoulder pad to make room for the specialty fist pauldrons that I give all my Space Marines. It's a bit less ornate, but I like the consistency, and it beats having a decal or having to freehand it. Pending models consist of some hastily snapped-up free folk heroes and thens, a box of cave dwellers that justified me driving downtown for a paintbrush and some matte black, and a box of bone warriors that were part of a generous birthday gift from a dear friend. I also scooped up this lovely little Sergeant Ripper mini from GW, just something I had to have. Pretty decent variants this month, and not as many as last, but that was pretty impressive. If we look at the totals, I had 19 models painted this month, putting me up at 214 and finally cracking the 200s. It's been a good year. Well, for painting, not much else. A slightly worrying 47 models pending this month, putting me at 302. So much for gaining ground. Only one game with painted minis this month, another rousing success in Call of Cthulhu. Me and my friends have a habit of half remembering certain rules in the first few times we play a new game, usually making the game much harder or easier for ourselves. This was the latter category, and I'm hoping to make Haster more of a challenge next time we square off against the King in Yellow. Not sure if there are any big releases coming down the pipe for October that I can't afford to miss, so for the time being I'll probably just be building up my Free Folk army. I hear that November is going to be heavy in releases. See you folks soon.